Okay, hello everyone. So today we have our guest speakers. They will be presenting the first 35 to 45 minutes of today's class. If you have questions about any of the resources that they're sharing with you, feel free to use the chat section, and that way I can stop them and let them know that you have questions, and they can answer your questions in a promptly manner. And they also shared lots of resources yesterday that I'll be sharing later tonight, and I'll send it via email. If for some reason you have difficulties getting on any of the links, please let us know, and we will address any problems with technology. Okay, so I met Cindy and Allison at the Illinois Association of School Social Workers, and their presentation was a 3-hour presentation. So they condensed a lot of this information for all of you. A lot of the feedback that I received from the attendees who went to their presentation was very positive, and they felt like they left the presentation more aware and more they had a better expertise as to how to write goals, and that's what I would want all of you to learn from today's class. So Cindy and Allison, go ahead and start your presentations and let me know if you need any assistance along the way.
All right.
Sounds good.
Sounds great. Good evening, everybody. My name is Cindy Hall. Just a little bit of a background for you. I'm a special ed coordinator, and we work at the Black Hawk Area Special Ed District in East Moline, Illinois. I started out as a school social worker, so I've been doing this job over 20 years. And then I moved into administration. And so currently, like I said, we're at BASED, and the districts that I have 4 districts. I also am the coordinator of our alternative school, and then one of our not our residential schools, but within one of my district's boundaries for our students within our co-op that attend there. But within the 4 districts, I have 6 schools that I'm responsible for. And my schools are a little bit smaller, so they don't have a special ed coordinator that they hire. So most of the time it's a principal who might not necessarily know about special ed. So they rely on me pretty heavily. And then I'll have Allison talk about her districts.
So yeah, hello everyone. My name's Allison Wilhelm, and my background is school social work. So I'm actually originally from the Chicago area and grew up in the Chicago suburbs, Western Springs, if you're familiar. So grew up in a very large school district myself, and then I started my career in Darien and then moved to South Pekin, Illinois, and started as a school social worker there. And then through getting married, moved to the Quad City area where we're at now, and actually worked on the Iowa side. So that was really interesting because state to state things are different. And they're actually school social workers over there, just in case you aren't aware, do much more of a consultative model with teachers and don't work as directly with students. So it's very different than Illinois. And it's more of systems level work. And then I became an administrator when I was in Iowa, and then moved back to Illinois, even though it was just across the river. And then, now I'm an administrator at BASED, and same position as Cindy. So I'm a special ed coordinator, and I have 5 buildings, 3 districts that I service, 5 buildings. Within that, I also have smaller districts. So similar to what Cindy said, they rely heavily on me because one of the districts does have a coordinator, but interestingly, she's also the guidance counselor for that district. So it's kind of an interesting role for her. And so they do rely heavily on me. And then I also supervise all of our occupational therapists and physical therapists. So that's been an interesting role. I definitely can relate with my social work background since it is a related service. But because I supervise all of them, that gets me in pretty much all of our 14 school districts in some capacity. So we have the larger districts like Rock Island and Moline as well. So yeah, definitely different type of system. I don't know where all of you are from, but yeah, we kind of have the gamut of large and small. So I love my job because it creates a lot of variety. So yeah, we just want to make this time really purposeful for you. So I know our time's limited. We'll jump in. Yeah, go ahead, Sydney.
So we'll go ahead. And I also, she supervises OTs and PTs, and I supervise a lot of the social workers and psychologists. And then my other co-op, I was that liaison person for them. So our passion is definitely social working and getting, always improving our skill and our profession.
And one other thing I'll say is just if you are at all interested in administration one day, like, wow, you definitely use a lot of your social work skills. It's all about people and conflict resolution and things we deal with the kids. You just deal with adults. So yeah, you get to use your skills all the time.
Yes. So we'll go ahead and we'll jump in. So we have started with this slide, and I just kind of want to throw it back to you guys, and just, as you look at this slide, what does this tell you? What does this mean to you when you look at this? And this means then I have, feedback. So, and I'm good with allowing silence. So what does that mean to you?
There's not really a wrong answer. So.
Mm-hmm. Sandra, I think you're on mute. I think you're talking, but you're on mute.
Yeah, she is.
Ooh, connection to Jeff.
Yeah, I do. I have connections. So I kind of know a little bit about your area. So
okay.
what does this mean to you in regards to this whole goal writing presentation or everything it's to me, it appears to be very overwhelming and scary when I first looked at it. And I feel like, oh my God, am I going to be able to, be able to do this? Am I going to be able to service these kids and write great goals to be attainable to what's going, for what the services the kids need and because I'm not in a great understanding of how the minutes, like out of 4 or 5 attempts come in, and I'm not quite understanding about like how you actually come up with the goal, because I'm fresh, I'm new, and we was on strike, so I haven't had that much training, but it just appears scary and overwhelming.
Yeah.
So hopefully once we break it down, again, this is such a small part of our presentation, but just, as we go through it, it'll give you kind of an idea. If we come back again, if we're invited to come back to the social work conference, come and attend our session. But we also like to not just leave people hanging. So at the end of our presentation, we have our emails. And we are always willing to help anybody. So, you can always contact us. It's all about teams. It's all about reaching out, networking, and helping each other, especially new social workers, helping them in the profession. So as far as this IEP alignment, we start with the present level. After like evaluation, eligibility, where do we go from there? So your present level is your basis for your whole IEP. So from your present level, you should be able to write your goal from that. So if an IEP comes to you, even if you don't know that student, all the information should be a snapshot of that student. And so I should be able to pick up the IEP and look at that present level of performance and say, okay, I know exactly what the student needs to write a goal. And then everything else should flow from there. We should know the needs and the strengths of the student as well. So go ahead and click. And so again, just your purpose for writing those goals is that it's a clear focus for instruction and for monitoring, and it communicates those expectations to others.
Okay.
Okay.
So this part, we're going to kind of go through all the specific components of a measurable goal. So if you want to click to the next graphic, I'm a very visual person. And so this graphic has just been really helpful for me from a color standpoint and just conceptualizing like what I need when I'm writing a goal. So if you see there's asterisks by a few of the components, and I'm going to break them all down, but the asterisks mean that those are kind of the ISB, Illinois State Board of Education, like what they look for when they're looking at what is a compliant goal for an IEP. So those are really important. The other components are going to just enhance your goal to make it more specific. And so that's also important because we are writing SMART goals. If you've heard of SMART goals, hopefully you have. But the key first letter there is that they're specific. So the more information you can put in your goal, the better, because if that kid were to move, and we'll talk about that and say that again, you just want whatever district person picks up that goal, that they would be able to read your goal and be able to implement it without even really knowing the student. So a well-written goal, you should be able to do that. So if you want to go to the next slide. The first component is condition. I honestly think this is probably the most tricky part of the goal. And it's also, I think, the part that people usually leave out unintentionally, but and I think the reason for that is they're just not clear of what is a condition, what's the definition of it. So the definition, as you can see on the slide, is a clear description of the assessment material that will be used to evaluate the learning outcome. So assessment material is like a key word in that definition. And when you're thinking, like we're writing behavior goals primarily, assessment material for an academic goal is super easy. I mean, if it's a fluency goal, it's that, you can see the example here, 4th grade reading passage, that's easy. But when it comes to behavior goal, that can be trickier. We use a lot of behavior charts, so that could be your assessment tool. But a lot of times it's an observation period. Like if you're looking at a specific skill in your social work setting, you're maybe observing it, and that's your assessment material. Another part of the condition definition, which and we're going to get into another component of the goal, which is setting, they kind of overlap and are pretty similar. So it's another definition is the conditions under which the behavior occurs. So that's where you see an example here during transition periods. That's not necessarily an assessment material, but that's more when does that behavior occur? And that can be considered a condition statement too. My recommendation would be you include both the assessment material and the setting, or that, like a phrase like during transition periods, because again, it's just going to make your goal that much clearer. So I think having both of those is important, even though for compliance purposes, you just need one of them. When you're I'm going to go let me say that now. One thing is when you're writing a condition statement and talking about assessment materials, don't name the specific material. You want to use more of a general description of it. So, because if that person moves, that district might not have that specific material. So for example, we were talking before, like cognitive behavioral therapy, like that is more general to say than a specific curriculum or program around that. Or like a lot of schools use zones of regulation, for example, if you were using that as part of your goal. Not every school though uses that, and you do have to pay for that material. So I wouldn't use the phrase zones of regulation. I might use utilizing with that curriculum, you're probably looking at coping skills. So I would focus my goal on coping skills and be assessing those. So hopefully that makes sense. Just that's true of an academic goal or a behavior goal. You just don't want to name that specific assessment material and make it more general.
So, or even using something like another example, like using the second step curriculum. Johnny will regulate his emotions or develop problem solving, and you're defining what those problem solving skills are. You're going to just name the skills that the second step curriculum is using. So because that could be your assessment piece as well, if that makes sense. Does it? I don't know.
We're going to go through some examples. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I was going to ask you to elaborate more on that. Go through the examples. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, what was that again?
Elaborate more on what she said, that like I've seen that them type of goals on the IEPs of the kids I've seen, but the social worker wrote them. But when you said utilizing what the second step is, what did you say about what's the second step is going to provide?
Well, second step is a curriculum that a lot of schools, and you have to purchase it, will maybe use for either as part of their PBIS or just their universal curriculum that they teach all students. It's nice for teachers because it pretty much like scripts out exactly what you should say. And so we're just saying, don't put that in your goal because not every school or district has that curriculum. So that curriculum does use, like Cindy was saying, specific skills. So like a whole section is on coping strategies. So you should write your goal more about, utilizing these specific coping strategies as opposed to using the second step curriculum, if that makes sense.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense.
So, okay, you can go to the next slide. This slide, the information on it, I'll start with, is off of a website called IEPQ, which we want to highlight. The link is at the bottom of the slide, but you having a district or school email address can go onto this website and create an account for free, and it's all of the information on there is be approved, so the Illinois State Board of Education. And so there's just examples in there for goals, not only goals though, any section of the IEP, if you're writing an FBA or a BIP, it's really helpful because we all like looking at what is a good example of the certain sections of the IEP. So just a plug for IEPQ, if you're not familiar with it, it's a great resource. So on there, the goal section of that website, it does talk about what a condition statement may start with. And so here's some good phrases like given or from the specific text or material, using, when provided with, when in a group of two or more other peers are good starter phrases if you're trying to make a condition statement. And then other things to consider in terms of condition statement is the curriculum materials that will be used, which we talked about. So again, don't name the specific curriculum, but if an example of an academic one could be we gave the second step example, so I won't elaborate on that one more, but the next one says grade level of the materials. So this is I don't know if for a behavior goal you'd use this as much, but an example for like a reading goal would be given a third grade level reading passage. You probably see that a lot. So you can reference the grade level. You can reference the supports the student needs. So with the use of a calculator, when provided with text on tape, that kind of gets into the accommodation realm, which we're going to talk about too, but which is another component of a goal. But those are good things to add to your goal. The amount, so given 10 problems on a fourth grade level, math probe or something would be an example. So specifically identifying or given, a list of 10 coping strategies, the student will, the last one says the circumstances. So this one is probably the one you'll most use for behavior goals, but this is when you're going to describe like during transition periods or when asked a direct question by a staff member that requires a verbal response. If you were writing like a following directions goal or looking at accepting feedback from an adult, you might use a condition statement like that. So just some examples and ideas. The next slide is just a list of assessment material examples. Again, for behavior goals, you're mainly going to use your behavior chart, your rubrics, potentially a checklist, observation. If you do use observation period, I would encourage you to specify how long, because you don't want to, like, when you're progress monitoring, be doing a 30-minute observation period one week and then comparing that to a 10-minute observation period the next week. So in your goal, I'd be specific on what that how long that observation period is. Okay, so the next slide is accommodation. So the definition here, assistance provided during the assessment. This is not a required component, but it's super helpful. So a lot of times for behavior goals, we have with teacher prompts. You know, if you were to write a goal and you didn't have that in there, and the student were to move, maybe that teacher isn't giving the new social worker isn't giving the student any prompts, and then their data is going to be skewed because all of a sudden that data is going to go down if they're tracking it that way. So if you're giving like 2 prompts for the student before you start collecting that data to see if they have it or not, you need to put that in that goal statement. The other thing I'll clarify, because we didn't say this before. Right now, we're talking about that overall goal statement. So we're going to get into the objectives and the benchmarks as we go on tonight in our presentation. But right now, just for clarification, what I'm talking about is that overall goal statement. So you can see just other examples of accommodations there. So then the next slide, sorry, go ahead, is setting. This one's pretty easy but important. Again, this gets kind of meshed with the condition statement as well, but it's the specific location in which the evaluation will occur. So instead of like it happens throughout the school day, it's really helpful if you can pinpoint certain times that you're trying to look at that behavior. So whether it be the lunchroom or recess, or just maybe you would put in the goal statement unstructured times versus structured. Maybe they really struggle during math class, so you might say, you know, when in math class. Definitely the setting is important if you're only collecting data in a certain location.
And to keep in mind that when you write a goal, they're looking for that goal will be met within that, like a 12-month period. So when you're looking at location, if a student, you know, you may need just to look at those unstructured times, or you may need to look in just one setting location. Maybe it's just the lunchroom, because really the student struggles across all settings. But are we going to decrease this behavior in all settings? That could be challenging to do. So we may need to focus it down and just kind of start, you know, maybe where they are having the most difficult times. But then you have to just kind of think about that. Where is it that we can start to and then show some success? Because just because it's not written as a goal, it doesn't mean that you're not going to continue to work on all settings, but really being specific to be able to get that data and to be able to hopefully show some progress.
Another thing about setting is a lot of goals that I've seen say in the social work setting, which is okay, but what I would tell you is don't write all your goals in the social work setting. Our goal for any kid is to have them generalize those skills in the gen ed environment, because then we know they're transferring. I had a kid who could tell me every single coping skill that I wanted to hear in my social work setting, but they could not implement any of them in the classroom. And so I had to change what I was doing with them and take data out in the classroom. And that's another thing is we were kind of surprised at the social work conference, but some people didn't know that you can collaborate on goals. And so that's really good and important. You know, you could, if you're doing a social skills goal, like collaborating with a speech and language pathologist is super good idea, because a lot of times they're probably working in a similar domain with their speech goal. And then another thing is collaborating with that special ed teacher, because if you're only seeing that student one day a week for maybe 20 minutes, what are their week is much longer than that. And so having that collaboration with the special ed teacher is just efficient, but also best for the student because of what I was just saying of the generalization of those skills in their, main environment, which is in the classroom. So yeah, just keep that in mind. The other thing I'll say now, since we're on the topic, is what I didn't put in the PowerPoint, but will be shared with you. Especially if you work, now you could use this tool that I shared with Marjorie. You could use it with any age, but your middle school and high school students especially, I think it's helpful for. It's called the Brief Behavior Rating Scale. It's a tool that is research-based and what I found user-friendly. I piloted it with multiple teachers and found that, because one of the reasons that people write goals within the social work setting is because it's controllable, right? Like we can control what happens in our setting. The second you write a goal that's in the classroom, getting that data in the classroom is harder because you have to rely sometimes on other adults. So that's all about building relationships, first of all. But secondly, if we utilize tools that are easy and efficient, that's going to help because teachers are busy, right? So this tool that I'll share with you, I love it because there's 5 different scales. So there's one for aggressive disruptive behavior, one for anxiety, which is hard because those are more internalizing behaviors that can be harder to track data-wise, I think. But this tool it has been helpful. There's an inattentive one and a social skills one, and I think depression as well. So yeah, those, you'll get access to all of them. And one thing I did is I put it in a Google form. So if you use Google, I put it in a Google form so that once a week I could email it to the teachers, and then they get it directly in their email and can just click. It's less than a minute for them. They can click right in their email, and then I have the data. So I also shared my template, like my Google form template that you can make a copy of and then tweak and use for your purposes as well. But the reason I adopted that tool and used it is I found it was a super good measure to tell me if the skills that I was using and teaching them in the social work setting were actually being generalized in the larger classroom setting. So you will have that tonight when Marjorie sends the email. So
another thing that Cindy mentioned last night in the other class, she shared an example on how you collaborated with a paraprofessional and gathered data that way. Do you mind sharing that with the class?
Sure. As Allison was saying too about building those relationships with your teachers and paras. So it's kind of whoever you can have that relationship with, talking to those paras, because especially if they're in the classroom or they're one-on-one para, you're going to get a lot of, you can get a lot of data and information from them. And it kind of builds them up too, to because they have a hard job. But absolutely, use paras, be creative on who you can get to help you get that data, and then not to forget to teach them how to take the data so they have a good understanding of what you're looking for. So, and I just, I see that Grant had sent something about in high school that the counselors are writing the goals, which is interesting to me because a lot of the high school counselors that I work with they're mostly academic. Mm-hmm. They're not writing goals. They're not, and if they're seeing kids, I'm always advocating like you should really have a goal there. But the other really important thing that I want to talk about is, besides collaborating on goals, not to be confused with implementing goals. So when you're implementing them with a speech path, because they're working on social pragmatics, and then you're working on those social skills as well. So both of you could be doing a group, and you're kind of getting a bigger bang for your buck, instead of always pulling students or going into the classroom doing push-in services. I'm big proponent on doing that in the classroom, and you're working with all the students, but you're also meeting those IEP minutes. The other thing is that we have to advocate for our social work profession. And so when you have counselors writing goals and kind of implementing some things, you know, we've got to know that we're collecting the data, and the things that we're doing as a social worker are meaningful, and we're making a difference in our schools. And so having that data, I think, is another great way for us to say, you know, we are important in your school. I've worked in schools where they don't hire social workers, they hire counselors, and or they hire their psychologists. I love both professions, not knocking them, but then they have the psychologist counseling, and they did not hire a social worker. So, you know, we have to be on board with this stuff.
I saw the question, so I'll answer. Yes, so the social worker doesn't have to conduct the observation. It can be someone else. It could be a parent, it could be a teacher. If you're using it for progress monitoring, it's best to have it be the same person, just for validity reasons, and that your data, you know, you're getting is measuring the same thing, but definitely doesn't have to be the social worker. And that's where, again, it goes back to building those relationships. I won't go into this too much, but there are research-based tools that make it, because that's a hard thing, is doing a 10-minute observation. A teacher can't be multitasking. They're good at multitasking, but not that good to be able to observe a particular student and teach at the same time. So there is tools out there that are research-based, ones called the direct behavior rating scale, and the DBR for short. And I won't go too much into that tonight, but there's, yes, there are tools out there that would help to answer your question.
And
just another idea too, at my school, if I'm doing an observation, we have a school interventionist, and then to have better inter-rater reliability, we talk about it. Yes. And I may go and do an observation at the same time. Perhaps he goes on a different day, and then we exchange the information, and we use what's called behavior snap. And I've shared this with the class. It's an iPad app available through Apple Store. It's about $10, and it's a very useful resource that gives you pie charts and gives you on-task and off-task data as well.
Yes, so I should clarify, you're right. Yes, you could have different people as long as you make sure they're measuring the same thing. And have that inter-rater reliability. So yeah, good point. And apps are really nice too to help us. So, okay, moving on. Student name, you can see this one's really easy. There's a asterisk by this one. We have to individualize our goals. So make sure that you're putting not the student will, but putting the specific, like Joey will, you know. And then also make sure that it's the right name. Sometimes we copy and paste things, and we have seen it, and it's super embarrassing, but do not put the wrong name in your goal. Like, that just doesn't make you look good, but it has happened. So yeah, make sure you have the right name. All right. Behavior is another one that's required. So just make sure when you're listing the behavior that it's very specific and observable. So again, it's that stranger test of, I should read your goal and know exactly what I'm looking for. So it should clear, you can see, and you guys all can read, but it needs to reflect an action which can be directly observed, and just those words: measurable, objective, observable way. And that ties to that SMART goal that we're trying to write as well. We will, on the next slide, give a few examples. So if you want to, so like we'll raise hand, I can definitely observe that. Now, the next one, we'll identify 5 coping strategies. I wouldn't just leave it at that because there's tons of coping strategies out there, and what works for your student might be something specific. So a lot of times I'll put specific examples of coping strategies, like, and especially in this case where you're identifying 5 specific ones, I would list those out in that overall goal statement, so there's no question of what they are. We'll list what qualities of a friend. We'll research the benefits of relaxation methods. So those verbs that you're using when you're describing the behavior, like, are really important. Like you're the last one there, will develop a PowerPoint. You have an end product, so that's observable. The PowerPoint is observable. So if we want to go to the...
And Sandra, no, That's just an example about, she asked, is it always best to use just 5? You could use 3. I mean, it depends on your student and where they're at. If I know they can't name any coping strategies, I may start with 3, because you can always go back and amend the goal.
Right.
So,
Okay,
yeah.
thanks.
Yeah. And again, that goes back to your present levels, like that first slide we had. If you're really doing a good job with your evaluation of identifying the need, then it'll make it easier to write your goal. So just can't emphasize that enough either. So this is just helpful, but a good FYI. Did you know that the number one complaint related to IEPs, and there's lots of sections of in the IEP, but is that people don't have measurable goals. So make sure you have a measurable goal. That's the number one complaint from parents. So the next component of a goal is criteria. Again, this one is required. This is your data. Like, you have to have data as part of your goal, because the point of a goal is to progress monitor, to make sure we know, hey, is what we're doing, is the interventions that we're doing, are they working? So you can see the definition here. You guys can all read and refer back to that. If you want to go to the next slide, because that gives some examples, but accuracy, a lot of times we use percentages. Don't just like put in your goal statement though 80% accuracy. I see that a lot. You need to make sure that you're not just picking a number, but that you have a reason behind why you're setting that goal there. So if a kid starts at 0%, because even though you have a year to meet that goal, you probably realistically won't make it to 80. So depending what you're working on. And so just keep that in mind. It's okay to have a lower percentage. You don't have to pick 80. And there's a whole nother workshop too of how I could show you all the math of how you should set a goal, but yeah, that's another topic. Time frame. This is not required, but is nice. A lot of times you'll see in 36 weeks, because 36 weeks is a school year time frame. So that's okay to put in there. Sometimes like we amend goals, right? Because that would be awesome because they meet the goal. And so you might write the new goal, their annual review date didn't change. So you might write it for, hey, in the next 9 weeks, I plan to have the student do this. So that's good to put in there. Okay, then the next slide.
Okay, so this is from IEPQ as well, and when we were kind of looking over our presentation, we thought this was really important. So just things to ask yourself when you write your goal, and I'm not going to read that, you guys can read that, but if you can answer yes, then it would be a well-written goal. As Allison said, and I just want to jump on that a little bit, whenever I have goals come in and I see like the student will master this with 80%, and I'll ask social workers, where did you get 80%? So a lot of times that's just kind of that's just what we do. A million years ago when I was a social worker in the school, that was 80%. You're always striving to get to 80%. So, but really think about, is this goal for this student? It's not when I pull up all of your IEPs and I see it's the same coping goal and it's the same, because we all want to be easy and have that goal bank. And I think I do put a plug in for a goal bank to get my mind starting to think about the direction of a goal for that student. But I would not definitely use goal banks and have those same goals for every single one of your students. So then the next slide talks about the stranger test. And again, as we've been saying, anybody should be able to pick up your IEP and your goal and know exactly what I need to do for the student to help them be successful. On the next slide, there's some non-examples. We talk about not having a goal for a one-time event. So the first one about participating in a field trip, that's a one-time event. If you have it, he participates, you're done, he met his goal because he participated. We didn't say that it was, inappropriate participation, he just participated. Fred will follow school expectations with 80%. What's wrong with that? Why would that be a non-example?
It doesn't state what school expectations are.
Perfect. Yeah. I don't know what those school expectations are. So my school expectations at my school and her, Allison's school expectations at her school could be very different. That's the same with problem solving or listing appropriate behavior. I don't know what that is. And that's hard if I have a student that might be at our alternative program and we have one that's going to interact appropriately. Okay, what does that mean? What does that mean? And then the last one, doing any task to teacher satisfaction. That's not measurable because everybody's idea of what satisfaction is could be very different. The same with respect or will be responsible for those things, very different. And then the next slide, we just added some sample action verbs, just some ideas of how you can either start your goal or use some of those words in your goal, because a lot of that, those words are observable. So just something to keep in mind. Okay, and then for the goal example, again, just as a reference there, what Allison had talked about, what is required for the measurable goal. And then we have an example on the next slide where we have the present level. Well, Bill shows physical and verbal aggression towards staff and peers by swearing, threatening staff, throwing things, knocking materials off desks, and property destruction. So we've described what that physical and verbal aggression looks like. And then his baseline on the behavior rating scale, we didn't name the scale, measuring aggression and destruction, was 24 out of 32 points. And so that condition, as you can see, is that behavior rating scale. We have the student's name, we have the behaviors that we want to focus in on, those coping skills, but then we went ahead and listed out examples of what coping skills are. And then our criteria, an average total of score of 5 or less. Again, your criteria, depending on where that student is and where you want to go, could be different. So at the bottom there is the goal using a behavior rating scale. Bill will demonstrate coping skills. It's listed out with an average total of 5 or less. And so then the next slide, we've added the accommodation.
And you might have to click a few times, Marjorie,
Oh.
sorry.
So it's exactly the same goal, present level and goal that we talked about, but including that accommodation using a visual cue card. So then pulling it all together using that behavior rating skill, Bill with visual cue cards will demonstrate those coping skills. You list those with an average of 5 or less. So very, very different when you throw in that visual cue cards, that accommodation.
Okay, I realize I have 3 minutes to go over the next section. So I will go
Such
fast.
important information that go for it. I think everyone is, absorbing everything. So I prefer that you take your time.
Okay, just making sure. Although this part's pretty quick, but it's important because so up until this point we've been talking about the goals, overall goal statement, and now we're going to move in to talk about objectives and benchmarks. And those are two different things. Compliance wise, you can use either one is fine, but you have to have a minimum of 2 objectives or 2 benchmarks. So keep that in mind. You can have more than that, but you need at least 2. Okay, so the purpose of an objective or benchmark is really just to help, again, monitor progress during the year, and so that you can revise the IEP if needed. And it just keeps us accountable, really. So going to the next slide, they're similar to your overall goal statement. They're measurable. They're specific statements. They have a condition, behavior, and criteria, which is those 3 main sections that we were talking about that are compliant pieces. And then they represent progress toward a goal. So now I'm going to break down the difference between the 2. So the next slide is benchmarks. So this one is actually, in my mind, easier to write just because you're really just copy and pasting. So you're taking your overall goal statement and you're going to copy and paste that, and I'll show you an example here. But what they are is you're breaking down those major milestones that the student will demonstrate to meet the overall goal. So you're designating usually a target time, and then like at that period of time, where will they be at progress wise on that goal. So going to the next slide, examples are always helpful. So say this was your present level about Bruce responding to teasing from his classmates. And then it says this has resulted in 10 office referrals per week. General education peers tend to only have 1 or less office referrals. It's always good, by the way, when you're writing your present levels for a goal to compare to the gen ed peers. That's a good way to know where we set our goal, is to know, where are those gen ed peers. That's a good indicator. So in this case, we're looking at office referrals. So the next slide. So here's the goal that we created. And it says, sorry, because my screen is a little, okay, thank you. When given instruction and coaching on how to ignore teasing, Bruce will walk away and ignore the teasing every time, thus reducing his office referrals that result from teasing incidents from an average of 10 to 0 per week for 4 consecutive weeks. So this is your overall goal statement. So then the next slide, I'm going to show you, this is what it would be if you wrote it as benchmarks. And we have 3 here, but remember, you only technically need 2. But you're just breaking down the time frame. So first benchmark, you're going to say in 9 weeks. And at that point, you want him to have an average of 10 per week. Because remember, sorry, I can't talk. It's the end at night. It says 8 there, but you started at 10. That was his baseline. And so now you're at 8 in 9 weeks, and then 18 weeks, you're at 5. And 27 weeks, you're at 3. So you can see, basically, you're going to copy and paste your overall goal statement, and then change that time frame and then the number for that criteria piece of your goal. So then, taking that same goal, we're going to look at a short-term objective. So first of all, short-term objectives, they break down the skills or steps necessary to accomplish that overall goal. So they're kind of like those stepping stones. So the next slide is, again, just the present level of Bruce, which you just already saw, same one. Okay. And then the next slide is his goal, same goal statement. And then the next slide is our example of if you were to write objectives. So again, same thing, you only need 2 of these. But when given a scenario, either through a video or book, Bruce will identify forms of teasing in 3 out of 4 trials. So the important piece here is we know from the present levels in the goal statement that we're talking about teasing and reducing those office referrals. So this objective statement here is something that you're specifically looking for within that year time frame for him to meet, and it's aligned with teasing. So a lot of times a problem we see is people put and it's not just social workers, it's anyone who works on an IEP. They will put like 3 different goals. They're on totally different skills in the objectives, and they don't align with that overall goal statement. Or their overall goal statement will be, I've even seen this, student will meet the following objectives, which is not compliant. So don't do that. So basically, this is a little bit harder to write, but if you have a good overall goal statement, it's really breaking down those steps that you want that student to achieve to get to the overall goal within that year. So does that kind of make sense, the difference, just seeing the example? I think, yeah, so that was kind of it. If you guys have any burning questions, here's our contact information. Again, please reach out. If you are working on a goal and you're like, is this compliant, or how can I make this better? We love helping. We say that, and we genuinely mean it. So yeah, just email anytime. Yeah, Sandra.
Just for this presentation, I'm understanding so much more. So basically, the goals and the reason for the goals, the benchmarks and the objectives, is something like the way I write my notes in the data, assessment, the plan. So everything you have, the data in there, what you assess, the plan, and the reason for the services, and just to continue. So am I looking at it the right way now?
Yes, and going back to that first slide that we had, like it's that alignment piece. It all connects.
Yeah.
Okay.
I get it.
So,
Thank you. Thank you. And we have such a great instructor. Thank you. I understand so much better.
good. That was our goal. So
Thank you.
yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you so much, Cindy and Allison. And I will reach out to both of you at the end of the night. And I appreciate you sharing all your knowledge and taking the time to do this twice this week.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, it was
Thank
fun.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Guys, you're awesome.